today we are going to start inking this 5-page mini comic. You guys watched me add spot color. Today we are going to be inking with black inks, and the materials you're going to need for this part of the process are brush pens. I am using Sakura of America's Pigma FB. These are waterproof, tiny little brush pens, and I love these things. I highly recommend them. I'm also going to be using a fine point, and I'll show you guys. Kind of reminds me of like a liner brush or a rigger brush. A fine point Pentel pigment brush pen. And I'm also going to be using some of their larger pigment brush pens. You guys have seen me use these, especially if you've watched my Inktober's. They're really good for fills. So all of the inks I'm using today are waterproof. The ink I used for my spot color was not. It is dye-based and water soluble. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a scratch sheet of paper. I'm also going to grab a ruler, and I happen to really like clear acrylic rulers. This is one made by Stad. I picked it up. Nope, it's made by Kutsuwa. And I picked it up. No, it says Stad over there. Somebody answer that for me. Anyway, I picked it up at Mido in San Francisco. And one of the first things I like to do is I often like to go ahead and ink my hard edges. And you can use that using a brush pen. Zoomity zoom 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 in so you guys can see what I'm up to. With a little bit of practice, you can actually get pretty good at inking straight lines using a hard edge or a straight edge with a small brush pen. But if that's not something you're good at just yet, feel free to grab a technical pen for this. All right, so you guys have seen me start that. I'm gonna do the rest of that in time lapse. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and start filling in my spot blacks. Now, knowing where to place spot black or heavy black or do a black fill, ooh, this pen is very drippy, that really comes with reading comics, looking at black and white graphic art, seeing how other artists do it, and a lot of practice. There are some kind of basic tips I can give you, like you can usually black out the underside of things or things facing away from the light. But developing it in a style that works for how you draw is really up to you. Okay, so for now we're going to skip down a panel because you guys can see how her hair sort of breaks the panel edge. I'm going to try out this finer Pentel brush pen. I'm always looking for a brush pen that really handles like a brush. You guys can probably see that my line work is a little bit sloppy. My hand is shaking. I need to go eat something. That's usually my first advice to people, is that they eat before they ink. Maybe listen to some relaxing music. This brush is a little bit hard to control when your hand is shaking, but it does seem like it might be a brush pen that actually handles a lot like a brush. Right now, I'm going to switch over to one of my larger Pentel brushes, and I'm going to do a spot fill. And I'm just going to color in all of her hair black. I'm not going to leave any highlight. I'm going to leave a little halo around her shoulder. I can always clean that up later. And I want you guys to notice I'm not really concerned about being perfect. I'm more concerned about being finished. When it comes to digital art, I think we're kind of encouraged towards perfectionism because we can correct forever if we want to, really. We can redo things a million times, but with traditional art, you do have limitations to how much you can correct. And I find that that's really good for kind of forcing an acceptance of your art. Not necessarily avoiding improvement, but rather than trying to massage one piece into perfection, you end up making a lot of pieces trying to get better. So you guys can see there's a little bit of shine to it. That means it is still wet. So I'm gonna go step away, grab myself some lunch, maybe stop my shaky hand problems, and then get back to inking. All right, I have been fed. Let's try this again. Yes, I do think me and the smaller Pentel brush pen can definitely learn to be friends. Takes some getting used to, but it does handle a lot like a regular brush. Also puts down a lot of ink though. So I'm gonna let that dry and then I'm gonna go back to inking our top panel. Inking out of order today. All right, so we have the Pigma FB. Now we can use the larger brush pen to ink her hair. But I'm gonna use this smaller one for the rest of the inking for her, I think. I'm just not quite good enough yet with the Pigma, with the Pentel. All right, for a little bit, I'm switching over to the Pigma FB. This is really better for finer lines. And what's neat about this is depending on how much pressure I put down on it and what angle I hold it, you can get varying line weights. And you'll also notice I rotate the page so that it's at an angle that's the most comfortable for me to ink. Also going to fill in this side of the table, but I'm leaving a little bit of a halo between her hair and the table edge. And I'm also going to do another just straight fill on her hair. I'm not leaving any highlights. Now I'm back to the finer FB. And I'm gonna do the outline on the thought balloon. So I'm not 100% happy with the line weight on the drafting table. And if this were a more serious comic, if this was 7-inch Kara, or if this was a comic I wanted to pitch, I would probably take time to fix that, make it look a little bit better. As it is though, I think I'm gonna move on because this is kind of a bonus comic. And I might come back to it and fix it, or I might even fix it digitally, which would honestly be the easiest way to explore different methods, play around with different methods of correcting. But really, I think if I just bumped the line art up all around the edges, that would help a lot. So that's probably what I'm going to do digitally. All right, and that is our first panel pretty much finished. Now I took a moment just to look at what I had and kind of reevaluate, and I definitely want to add a little bit of shadow on the neck, so where the head overlaps the neck. As well as on the arms, and then on the ear where the hand crosses over. Alright, so I think I'm going to ink her hands before I ink the computer on this panel here. So we've got the, I keep wanting to call it the large. It's not a large, it's a small, but it's so much larger than what I am usually comfortable inking with. But I really love bouncy dynamic line weights, and if you want that, you either have to do it by hand or you have to get comfortable with using brushes. And if you guys are interested in a brush inking demonstration, I do have several of them on this channel. I do like inking with a brush. I just didn't think this was really the time to get technical with that. Think of this as kind of a very basic inking video. Alright, so I bumped up the line art here on the arm. That's going to push that into the distance. But only because it casts kind of a shadow, so it creates sort of a hierarchy of forms. Generally, objects further in the distance are going to be inked with a finer line weight, or even like a grayscale sort of effect. Now, the really important thing when you're inking straight edges like this, there's a couple of them. One, you really want to hold your ruler secure. That's why many rulers have a cork or a foam backing to them. You also want to occasionally wipe this edge off because since it's acrylic, it's not going to absorb the ink. The ink's going to kind of stay fresh on it and has a tendency to get everywhere. So just in between panels, you can use a paper towel, a napkin, whatever you have on hand to just wipe the edge off. There's something kind of relaxing. Oh, I'm so sorry about that, guys. There's something kind of relaxing about inking straight edges. I guess because they're so uniform and you can kind of do them quickly. They don't necessarily require a lot of muscle skill. It's more of a technical skill. And with a loose, cartoony style like the one used in this comic, inking tends to be a very quick task. Now, generally, I will allow my inks to cure, to dry out for 24 hours before I do any sort of corrections or before I erase my pencils. And this is just kind of your insurance against ghosting, or, you know, when some of the ink picks up with your eraser. Another little bit of insurance against that is just using a really soft white vinyl eraser. Another neat thing about a brush pen is you can vary your line weight, even using a straight edge, by how much pressure you apply. So this is something that's going to take some practice, but you'll eventually be able to pull very fine lines or very thick lines. And I know for some of you guys, seeing me work sideways like this is a little nauseating, but like I said earlier, it's really important to turn your paper so that you're working at an angle that's comfortable for you, comfortable for your wrist. A lot of artists will end up getting carpal tunnel syndrome, kind of trying to force themselves into a drawing position that's uncomfortable or unnatural for them. Okay, so I think what I want to do, I'm actually just going to black in the kickstand entirely. I think that helps. And that leaves us with the third and final panel. So on this final panel, I'm going to try to use the Pentel pigment brush pen as much as possible. I really want to get good at using this thing. And the only way you can get good at using anything is by putting the time in and practicing. However, for the pages, I am going to use the FB because, you know, paper is thin, paper is fine. We want to use a fine line that's going to help convey that it's thin sheets of paper rather than, I don't know, rough hewn sheets of stone. And we're probably gonna end up inking her pencil with that as well. So I'm starting with a thin line, and as I'm pulling it closer to myself, I'm getting it thicker, and that's kind of creating this atmospheric perspective of distance. And it's, you know, it's a small thing, but the small things add up. You really want your viewer to kind of be so immersed in what you're doing that they don't realize you're using visual tricks to help convey the story, help tell the story. I'm doing another line of shadow on the sheet underneath. And I'm using the same technique I demonstrated before. Where we have a heavier line art in the foreground towards the viewer and a lighter line art as we pull away. So I find it's easiest for me to start thin, and as I pull towards myself, put on more pressure. Another thing I like a lot about brush pens of all types is that it doesn't matter what direction you prefer to ink with. With nibs, you can end up scraping up and scratching your paper. But brush pens tend to work any direction you choose to pull them. Okay, so that is the paper drawn. Now I'm going to ink the details on the cup of coffee. Adding a bit of a shadow to the lip of the cup. And adding some grooves to the corrugated cardboard sleeve. And then I'm going to use the FB to do the line on the table. And we're going to try to pull our strokes as long and as fluid as we possibly can. Some mangaka, in order to get really fluid strokes, will just draw through the whole thing and then use whiteout to correct that. I'm not quite there. I'm not quite ready to commit to that. Some artists will also use French curves, which are an inking tool designed to help you pull really nice, clean curves. It's basically a ruler for curves, and you align your sketched curve with a curve on the ruler, and you kind of rotate the French curve until you find the right one, and then you use it as a straight edge. When I was at SCAD, they kind of implied, well, the teacher who was teaching that class kind of implied that like legit real artists do that. And I'm sure there are legit real artists who do that. But I have owned a set of French curves for almost 10 years, and I don't know that I've used it once. So maybe I'm not a real legit artist. Okay, so for inking something this large, I'm going to have to give my arm more room to pull. It also means bracing the paper so that it doesn't pull with me as I pull the lines. I really love how fine I can get some of those lines. There's a little bit of a taily-po, a little bit of a tail on this pentel. And sometimes I'll cut that off with scissors, but I've also ruined brush pens doing that. So I'm just going to try to learn to work with it. Taily-po there is making it hard to ink some things. Trying to keep my brush strokes fluid and loose. I am going to fill this in, but I'm going to ink the rest of her with this as well, and I'm not going to fill that in, so I'm trying to get a good rhythm. These days I like to do as few corrections as possible. It comes from doing watercolor and from alcohol marker art. You have to wait till the end often to do your corrections. I don't like or kind of believe in stopping in the middle of what you're doing to make corrections, I will keep notes. If it really bugs me, I'll write a note of it, and then correct it at the end. But I try not to break up my flow to do corrections. Oh, look at that. So I found an area that needed to have some spot color, and I missed it the first time. No, I used the wrong one. I grabbed without looking. Ah! Fortunately, this is not a comic for a pitch. This is not a comic that has any work hinging on it at all. It's just a comic I'm doing alongside my making comics and zines class. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's not the end of the world. Not that it's ever really the end of the world. There's always ways you can fix your mistakes. I'm gonna go ahead now and fill in her hair. And I hope all of the techniques I've shown you guys today seem very easy, very accessible, like something you would be willing to try out yourself. 'Cause that's really my goal. I really want to make comics something more people can enjoy. Now, I do firmly believe that you can only get better at comics by reading comics. So if my making comics and zines videos have inspired you, please take a moment and head on over to inkdropcafe.com. There's loads of fantastic webcomics there that are free to read. Something for every interest. In fact, my own comic is a member comic there. It's a great place to start. Another wonderful place to start is your local library. If you find that your local library just doesn't have a collection, you can always fill out a request form. In fact, that's a huge favor, not only for comic artists whose work you might be requesting, but for other people in the area who like comics, enjoy comics, and don't realize that as a patron of the library, they have the right to request books for the library to carry. Libraries have budgets, and if they don't spend it, they lose it. And comics is a fine way to spend that money. So I'm just going to fill in her hair, and then I'm going to let it dry a little bit. I'm using the larger Pentel brush pen. This thing is great for doing larger fills like this. And when I do these halos, I leave the halo on the layer under rather than on the top layer. Kind of a reverse shadow. It doesn't actually matter which way you go. You can leave it on the top if you wish. It's really just about doing it consistently. I love seeing how cute and graphic it looks as I fill in all the heavy blacks. Really makes the art style come together. This style is designed, it's cartoony style, and it's designed to carry these sort of bouncy, heavier line works. Not every style is suited for heavier line works. I find my work tends to work better with heavier line art than it does with delicate line art. All right, so looking pretty cute. I'm gonna let her hair dry. Knew that line was looking kind of large. I grabbed the wrong one. All right, so I think that is it for today's page. We still have 4 more pages of this mini comic to go, but fear not, I'm not going to make you watch every single one. I may record them and share them as time lapses, but I think you guys get the general idea. I think you guys have enough to go on. I hope this video has inspired you to give inking a try if you haven't yet, or maybe introduced you to some inking tools that might help change up, shake up your game a little bit. I will check in with you guys when I have all 5 pages inked. All right, art nerds, so these pages have been inked. If you guys are interested in seeing the process for the pages not inked in the video, that should be up shortly. The next step is I'm going to need to make some corrections. And, recently, maybe not recently to you guys, but recently I did an overview of various white correctional fluids, and I found a couple new favorites, and I kind of reestablished an old love. So in that video, I'm going to introduce you guys to my 3 favorites. So if you're interested in inking, traditionally, you should definitely keep an eye out for our next Making Comics and Zines video. So in this video, or rather, as I sort of finished inking these, I switched over to a Sailor Ryofuka, and it's sort of like the newer version of the Sailor Mitsuo Ida, which is another pigment-based waterproof pen. And I just did that because my Sakura pigment FBs have all run dry. So for those of you who are watching those time lapses, that explains the switch. So I look forward to seeing you guys in my video where I demonstrate how to do corrections on your traditional media comic pages. I hope you guys have been enjoying this series. I sure have. And I hope you guys will consider joining my art nerds on Patreon, because not only did they get access to these videos first, but they also get access to recordings of my Making Comics and Zines classes, as well as access to the link and resource docs I've been putting together for my students. So if you want to learn how to make comics, or if you are learning how to make comics, or if you're a comic artist who's interested in upping your game, that could be a fantastic resource for you. So I'll see you guys in our next video. Bye!